Shakti Seer 2.
Okay, I'm recording. Today I'm going to read from Chapter 4 of the Lotus Sutra. Chapter 4 of the Lotus Sutra initially got my attention because I was looking at the Lotus Sutra Wikipedia page, and in the middle of the Lotus Sutra's Wikipedia page it says that the Lotus Sutra indicates in Chapter 4 that emptiness, sunyata, is not the ultimate vision to be attained by the aspirant bodhisattvas. The attainment of Buddha wisdom is indicated to be a bliss-bestowing treasure that transcends seeing all as merely empty or merely labeled. And it says on the page of Buddhahood that on Mahayana Buddhism, the Tibetan master Dolpopa said that the Buddha is to be understood as the wondrous and holy wish-fulfilling essence of all things, beyond comprehension. Buddha, in essence of immeasurable, this is a quote from him, Buddha, in essence of immeasurable, incomprehensible, unfathomable, excellent, exalted body, wisdom, qualities, and activities, extremely wondrous and fantastic, is vast like space and the holy source, giving rise to all that is wished by sentient beings like a wish-granting jewel, a wish-granting tree. Okay, so this chapter 4 of the Lotus Sutra is a beautiful parable. It looks almost like it was taken from, I made the remark yesterday that it looks almost like it was taken from the New Testament, just because of the type of story and the parable that it is. But it describes how that emptiness, non-attachment, and all these kind of things which are associated most prominently with Buddhism were lesser dharmas that the Buddha had to engage us in because he understood, well, those people who followed those lesser quote-unquote truths initially, I myself being one of them, that God or Buddha had to show lesser dharmas in order to attract people because they couldn't out and out accept the highest realization of their nature and of Buddha, of God. And the metaphor that they use is like a king who has all of these jewels and gold and all these kind of things, and he's trying to gradually bequeath these things to his son, but the son of the king in this story is not aware that he's the son of this greatly wealthy king. So the king has to adopt expedient means in order to trick the son into coming closer to him. And then later on, he realizes who he is and who the king was, and etc. So it's a beautiful story about how that the atheistic, quote-unquote, side of Buddhism is not the ultimate side, and that the ultimate side of Buddhism is the great vehicle, or the Mahayana, which puts the emphasis on the endless path of compassionate service to the Buddhas, to the forms of God, in other words, and to working to help awaken others and bring others into enlightenment. This is said to be more transcendental, higher, and actually the only path. So let me just begin then. Chapter 4 of the Lotus Sutra, Belief and Understanding. If you want to read along, you can just Google Lotus Sutra and you should be able to find it. At that time, the wise and long-lived Shubhuti, Mahakatyayana, Mahakashyap, and Mahamagdayana Having heard from the Buddha Dharma such as they had never heard before, the bestowal of the prediction of Anuradhasamyakasambodhi upon Shariputra felt it very rare. They rose from their seats, jumped for joy, straightened their robes, bared their right shoulders, placed their right knees on the ground, and single-mindedly put their palms together, inclined themselves respectfully, and gazed at the honored countenance, and spoke to the Buddha, saying, "We who dwell at the head of the Sangha and are advanced in years told ourselves that we had already attained nirvana and had no further responsibility, and we did not go forward to seek Anuttara Samyakasambodhi." Anuttara Samyakasambodhi is supreme perfect wisdom. The world-honored one has from of old been speaking the Dharma for a long time. Sitting here all this time, our bodies tired, we have merely been mindful of emptiness, signlessness, signlessness, and wishlessness, taking no delight in the Bodhisattva Dharma, in their samadhis of playfulness, in their purification of Buddha lands, or in their maturation of living beings. What is the reason? The world-honored one has led us to escape the three realms and to attain certification to nirvana. Besides, we are now advanced in years, and when the Buddha taught the bodhisattvas of Anuttara Samyakasambodhi, we did not give rise to even a single thought of longing for it. Now, in the presence of the Buddha, having heard him bestow upon the sound hearers the Anuttara Samyakasambodhi prediction, our hearts rejoice enthusiastically, and we obtain what we had never had. We never thought that now we would suddenly be able to hear this rare Dharma. We rejoice profoundly, having gained great and good benefit. It is as if, without our seeking them, limitless precious gems had come into our possession. World-honored one, we would now like to speak a parable to clarify this principle. It is as if there were a person who, in his youth, left his father and ran away, dwelling long in another country, perhaps 10, 20, or even 50 years. As he grew older, he became poor and needy and ran about in the four directions in search of clothing and food. Gradually, he wandered until he accidentally approached his native land. His father, from the first, had set out seeking his son, but in vain. He settled midway in a city. His household was one of great wealth, with limitless wealth and jewels, gold, silver, lapis lazuli, coral, amber, crystal, pearls, and other jewels. His granaries and treasures were overflowing, and he had many servants, ministers, and assistants, as well as countless elephants, horses, carriages, cattle, and sheep. The profits from his trade extended to the other countries, and there were also many traders and merchants. Then the poor son, having wandered through various villages and passed through countries and cities, at last reached the city where his father had settled. The father had always been mindful of his son. Although they had been separated for over 50 years, he never had spoken of the matter to anyone, but merely pondered over it, his heart filled with regret as he thought, "I am old and decrepit. I have much wealth, gold, silver, and precious gems, granaries and storehouses filled to overflowing. Such a pity that I have no son. One day I am bound to die, and when I do, my wealth will be scattered and lost, for I have no one to bequeath them to." This is why he ever earnestly thought of his son. If I could only get my son back, I'd make him heir to my wealth. I'd be contented and happy and have no further worries. World-honored one, the poor son, then, hiring himself out as a laborer here and there, unexpectedly arrived at his father's house. Standing by the gate, he saw his father seated on a lion seat, His feet were rested on a jeweled footstool, and he was reverently surrounded by Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and lay people. Necklaces of real pearls, their value in the millions, adorned his body. Attendants and servants holding white whisks waited on him right and left. Above him was a jeweled canopy hung with flowers and pendants. Fragrant water was sprinkled on the ground, and expensive flowers were scattered about. Precious objects were placed in rows, which were passed out and taken in on leaving and entering. Such were the adornments and the majesty and authority of his awesome virtue. When the son saw his father, the poor son saw his father, possessed of such great power, he was immediately afraid and regretted having come there. Secretly he thought, "This is perhaps a king, or one equal to a king. This is no place for me to hire myself out. I'd better go to a poor village, where there will be room for me to work, and where I can easily obtain clothing and food. If I stay here any longer, I may be forced to work against my will," and with this thought he quickly ran off. Then the wealthy elder, seated on a lion seat, seeing his son, recognized him, and his heart rejoiced greatly, as he thought, "I now have someone to whom I can bequeath my whole wealth and treasures. I have constantly been mindful of my son, but had no way of seeing him. Then all of a sudden he came on his own, and my wish has been fulfilled. Although I am old and decrepit, I still longed for him with regret." He then sent attendants to follow him and bring him back. Thereupon the servants quickly apprehended him. The poor son in alarm shouted in resentment, "I have committed no offense. Why have I been seized?" The servants, with even greater haste, grabbed him and dragged him back. The poor son thought to himself, "I am blameless, and yet have been imprisoned. This surely means that I will die," and even more frightened, he fainted and fell to the ground. The father saw his son from afar and said to the servant, "I do not need this person. Don't force him to come along. Sprinkle cold water on his face to bring him to, but do not speak further with him." Why was this? The father knew that his son's resolve and will were inferior and lowly, and that his own nobility was a source of difficulty to his son. Therefore, although he was certain that this was his son, he expediently refrained from telling anyone, "This is my son." The servant said to the son, "I now set you free. You may go wherever you wish." The poor son was delighted, having gained what he had never before. He rose from the ground and went to the poor village to seek clothing and food. Then the elder, wishing to induce his son, set up an expedient and secretly sent 2 people, haggard and undignified in appearance, saying to them, "You may go there and gently speak to that poor one. Tell him there is a place for him to work here where he can earn twice as much. If he agrees, bring him back and put him to work. If he asks what he is to do, tell him that you're being hired to sweep out dung. We too will work alongside you." Then the 2 servants sought out the poor son, and when they found him, they told him the above matter in detail. At first, this poor son took his salary and then joined them in sweeping the dung. When the father saw his son, he felt pity and amazement. Later, on another day, through a window, he saw his son at a distance, thin, haggard, soiled with dung, dirt, and filth. He then removed his necklace of beads, his soft upper garments, and his adornments, and put on a coarse, worn-out, and filthy robe, smeared himself with dirt, and holding a dung shovel, looking frightful. He addressed his workers, saying, "All of you, work hard, do not be lax." By this device he draws near to his son, to whom he later says, "Hey, my boy, you should stay here and work. Don't go elsewhere. I will increase your wages. Whatever you need, be it pots, utensils, rice, flour, salt, or vinegar, or other such things, don't trouble yourself about it. I have an old worn-out servant you can have if you need him. So put your mind at rest. I am like your father, so you have no more worries. Why? I am very old, and you are very young and strong. Whenever you are working, you are never deceitful, remiss, angry, hateful, or grumbling. I have never seen you commit such evil acts as I have seen the other workers. From now on you shall be like my own son." Just then the elder gave him a name, calling him his son. The poor son, although delighted at his happening, still referred to himself as a lowly worker from outside. For this reason, for 20 years he was constantly kept at work, sweeping away dung. After this, they trusted one other, and he came and went without difficulty. However, he still stayed in the same place as before. World-honored one. At that time, the elder grew sick and knew he would die before long. He said to the poor son, I now possess much gold, silver, and jewels, and my granaries and storehouses are filled to the overflowing. You should know the detail, their quantities, and the amounts to be received and given. Such are my thoughts, and you should understand what I mean. What is the reason? You and I are no difference. You should be even more careful that nothing be lost. At that time, the poor son, having received these instructions, took charge of all the goods, the gold, the silver, the precious gems, as well as the granaries and storehouses. And yet, he did not long for so much as a single meal. He continued to stay in the same place, still unable to let go of his lowly thoughts. After a short while, the father knew that his son had grown more relaxed, that he had accomplished a great resolve and despised his former state of mind. Knowing that his own end was near, he ordered his son to gather ministers, kshatriyas, and lay people. When they had all assembled, he spoke to them, saying, All of you gentlemen should know that this is my son, begotten by me. In a certain city he left me and ran away to suffer desolation, poverty, and hardship for over 50 years. His original name was such and such, and my name was such. Long ago in my native city I anxiously sought him. This is really my son. I am really his father. All of my wealth now belongs to my son, and all that has been paid out and taken in is known by him. World-honored one, when the poor son heard what his father had said, he rejoiced greatly, having obtained what he had never had. And he thought, originally I had no thought to seek anything, and now this treasury has come to me of itself. World-honored one, the great and wealthy elder is the thus come one. We are all like the Buddha's sons. The Tathagata has always said that we are his sons. Tathagata means the thus come one. I always love that expression for the Buddha, Tathagata, thus come one. It refers not only to the Buddha, but it can refer to all enlightened qualities in general, all the avatars and everything which is an extension of the realm of suchness. World-honored one, because of the 3 kinds of sufferings, we have suffered much torment in the midst of birth and deaths. Deluded and ignorant, we clung to petty dharmas. Today, the world-honored one has caused us to think about getting rid of the dung of frivolous discussions of the Dharma. We increased our vigor to earn 1 day's wage of nirvana. Having attained this, our hearts rejoiced greatly, and we were content, saying to ourselves that through our diligence and vigor we had gained in the Buddha Dharma. What we had gained in the Buddha Dharma was plentiful. However, the world-honored one, knowing all along that our minds were attached to lowly desires and took delight in petty dharmas, let us go our own way, and did not specify to us, saying, You are all to have a share in the treasury of the thus come one's knowledge and vision. The world-honored one, using the power of expedient devices, has spoken of the Tathagata's wisdom. Having gained from the Buddha the 1 day's wage of nirvana, we took it to be a great attainment. We had no ambition to seek the great vehicle, in other words, the Mahayana. Besides, the wisdom of the Tathagata had been set forth for the sake of the Bodhisattvas, so he held no expectations regarding it. What is the reason? The Buddha knew that our minds took delight in petty dharmas. He used the power of expedients to teach us in the appropriate manner, and we did not know that we were truly the Buddha's sons. Now we know that the world-honored one is by no means ungenerous with the Buddha's wisdom. Why? From of old we truly have been the Buddha's sons, and yet we delighted only in petty dharmas. If we had thought to delight in the great, the Buddha would have spoken for us the great vehicle Dharma. This sutra speaks of only one vehicle. In the past, in the presence of the Bodhisattvas, the Buddha had belittled the sound hearers who take delight in lesser dharmas. But he was actually employing the great vehicle in teaching and transforming them. Therefore we say that originally we had not hoped for or sought anything, and yet these great jewels of the Dharma King have come to us of themselves. That which the Buddha's sons should attain, we have already attained. And then it goes into another part, and that's the end of the story, but there's another little summation here, which I'll read. At that time, Mahakashyapa, wishing to restate the meaning, spoke verses, saying, "We, on this day, hearing the sound of the Buddha's teaching, jump for joy, gaining what we never had. The Buddha says that sound hearers shall come Buddhas in the future, a cluster of supreme gems which we have gained without our seeking. It is like a youth who, young and ignorant, ran away from his father to another distant land, roaming from country to country for 50 years and more. His father, worried about him, sought him in the 4 directions until, tired of the search, stopped in a certain city, where he built himself a house and amused himself with the 5 desires. His household was very large and wealthy, with much gold and silver, mother of pearls and lapis lazuli, elephants, horses, cattle, and sheep, hand-drawn carts, palanquins, and chariots, husbandmen and servants, and a multitude of subjects. The profits from his trade extended to the other countries. Traders and merchants were present everywhere. Multitudes in the hundreds of millions surrounded him reverentially. And always by kings he was cherished and remembered. The ministers and noble clans all honored him. For these reasons, those who came and went were many. Such was his nobility, wealth, and his great authority. But then, as he grew old and decrepit, he was filled with worry for his son. Morning and evening, his only thought was, "My time of death is drawing near. My foolish son has left me now for over 50 years. The things in my granaries and storehouses, whatever shall I do with them?" Then the poor son, seeking clothing and food, went from city to city, from county to country to country, sometimes getting something, sometimes getting nothing. Starving, emaciated, covered with scabs, he went on his way until eventually he arrived in the city where his father lived. Hiring himself out along the way, he finally reached his father's house. At that time, the elder within his gateway was covered by a large canopy and seated on a lion throne. Surrounded by his retinue and various attendants, some of them were counting up his gold, silver, and other valuables. His income and expenses were recorded on the ledgers. When this poor man saw his father of such nobility and wealth, he said, "This must be a king, or the equal of a king." In fright, he reproved himself. "Why have I come here?" And further to himself, he said, "If I stay here long, I may be oppressed and be forced to go to work." Having had this thought, he hurriedly ran off to a poor village, asking to be hired out to work. Just then, the elder, seated on the lion throne, saw his son at a distance and silently recognized him. He then commanded his attendants to seize him and bring him back. The poor son cried out in alarm and fainted, falling to the ground. "These people have caught me. I shall certainly be killed. Why, for food and clothing's sake, did I come to this place?" The elder knew that his son was foolish and lowly. "He wouldn't believe me if I told him. He wouldn't believe that I am his father." Then he used an expedient and sent some other men, one-eyed, squat and ugly, lacking awesome virtue. "Speak to him," he said, "and tell him, you will work with us, getting rid of dung and filth at twice your normal wages." When the poor son heard this, he happily followed them back and swept out the dung and filth, cleaning all the dwellings. Remember, the dung and filth is symbolic of the lesser dharmas. From his window, the elder would often watch his son, remembering that he was foolish and lowly and enjoyed menial work. Then the elder put on a worn and dirty robe, and holding a dung shovel, went to where his son was. Expediently drawing near to him, he said, "Work with diligence, for I have increased your wages, and your fill of food and drink, and I will give you oil for your feet, and your fill of food and drink, and thick warm bedding." Thus he spoke sharply, saying, "You must work hard." And then in gentler tones he added, "You are like my own son." The elder in his wisdom eventually allowed him to come and go for a period of 20 years. He was put in charge of the household business. He showed him his gold, silver, real pearls, and crystal. The income and expense of all these things he was caused to know. And yet the son still lived outside the gate, dwelling in the grass hut, thinking of his poverty. "None of these things are mine," quote unquote. The father knew his son's mind gradually had expanded, and wishing to give him wealth, he gathered together his relatives, the kings and great ministers, the kshatriyas and lay people. In the middle of this great assembly, he said, "This is my son. He left me and went away 50 years ago, and it has been 20 years since I saw him return. Long ago in a certain city, I lost my son, searching for him everywhere. I came to this place. Everything that I own, my houses and servants, I bequeath it all to him, that he may use it as he pleases." The son, recalling his former poverty and his lowly intentions, who now in his father's presence had obtained these precious jewels and these dwelling places and all such wealth, greatly rejoiced, having gained what he never had. The Buddha, in the same way, knew our fondness for the petty, and so he never said to us, "You shall become Buddhas," but instead, he said we could attain cessation of all outflows, realize the lesser vehicle, and become sound hearer disciples. The Buddha had instructed us to speak of the unsurpassed path and spoken of those who practice it as being able to accomplish Buddhahood. Receiving the Buddha's teaching, we, for the sake of the great bodhisattvas, uses cause and conditions, various analogies, and numerous expressions to speak of that unsurpassed path. All of the Buddha disciples, having heard from us this Dharma, think upon it day and night and diligently practice it. Thereupon all the Buddhas then bestow predictions upon them, saying, "You in a future age shall become Buddhas." This is the secret store of Dharma. Of all the Buddhas, only for the Bodhisattvas are real matters set forth, and not for our sakes. Have such true essentials been spoken? Just as the poor son drew near his father, and although he knew of all his possessions, in his heart he held no hope of getting them. In just the same way, even though we have spoken of the Buddha Dharma's precious store, we personally never aspired to it. Having attained inner extinction, we thought this sufficient. For having completed this, there was nothing else to be done. And even if we had heard of purifying Buddha lands and teaching and transforming living beings, we'd have taken no delight therein. And for what reason? All dharmas are completely empty and still, neither produced nor destroyed, neither great nor small, without outflows and unconditioned. Reflecting in this way, we did not give rise to joy. During the long night, we had no craving or attachment for the Buddha's wisdom, nor did we aspire to it. Yet as to Dharma, we claimed that we had the ultimate. All through the long night, we practiced and cultivated the Dharma of emptiness. Having won release from the three realms with its suffering, distress, and calamities, we dwell within our final bodies in nirvana with residue. According to the Buddha's teaching, we attain the way which is not false and we assumed that we had thereby repaid the Buddha's kindness. Although we, for the sake of the Buddha's disciples, spoke of the Bodhisattva Dharma, with which they should seek Buddhahood, still in this Dharma we never took delight at all. Our Master saw this and let things be because he saw into our hearts, and so at first he did not encourage us by telling us of the real advantage. Just as the wealthy elder used the power of expedients to bring his mind under control and afterwards gave to him all of his valuables, the Buddha in the same way manifests rare things, but for those who delight in the small, he uses the power of expedients to bring their minds under control, only then teaching the greater wisdom. On this day we have gained what we never had. That for which we lacked hope we have now attained, just as the poor son gained limitless treasure. O world-honored one, now we have obtained the path and its fruits. Within the non-outflow Dharma we have gained the eye, pure and clear. During the long night we maintained the Buddha's pure morality, but only on this day have we gained this reward. In the Dharma King's Dharma, long have we cultivated Brahminical conduct. Now we've obtained that non-outflow, the unsurpassed great fruition. Now we are truly sound hearers, and taking the sound of the Buddha's way, we cause all to hear it. Now we are all truly arahats, and in all the world with its gods, people, maras, and brahmas, everywhere among them we are worthy of receiving offerings. The Buddha, the world-honored one in his great kindness, uses this rare thing to pity, teach, and benefit us throughout the millions of aeons, throughout limitless millions of aeons. Who could repay him? Giving one's hands and feet, bowing reverentially in obeisances, whatever offerings one makes, never repays him. If one bore him upon one's head or carried him upon one's shoulders for aeons as numerous as the sands in the river Ganges, exhausting one's mind in reverence, or further if one uses delicacies and limitless valuable clothing and all types of bedding and various medicine, ox head, sandalwood, and various precious gems or stupas of temples, covering the ground with valuable cloth, and if with such things as these one made offerings, one made offerings throughout aeons as numerous as the Ganges sands, one still never repays him. The Buddhas are rare indeed, limitless and boundless. Yet, the Buddhas are rare indeed, limitless and boundless. Yes, inconceivable is the power of their great spiritual penetrations. Without outflows, unconditioned, they are king of all the dharmas. For the sake of lesser beings, they bear up under this work. To common folks who grasp at marks, they teach what is appropriate. The Buddhas have within the dharmas attained the highest comfort. They understand all living beings, various desires and delights, as well as the strength of their resolve according to what they can bear. Using limitless analogies, they teach the Dharma in accord with living beings. Wholesome roots from former lives, and knowing those who have matured and those who have not yet matured, through such calculations, they discriminate and understand, and in the pathway of the one vehicle, they appropriately speak of three. That last line is in reference to the fact that Mahayana Buddhists teach that although the Buddha talked in terms of Prateka Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and I forget the last one, Shravaka, sound here, maybe. Although the Buddha speaks of three paths, there's only one path in Buddhism, and that's the path of the Bodhisattva. Someone who only takes interest in serving God and the living beings, and is not interested in their own nirvana, not interested in, well, only interested in it as much as is necessary to teach. And the king in this story is not aware that he's the son of this greatly wealthy king. So the king has to adopt expedient means in order to trick the son into coming closer to him. And then later on, he realizes who he is and who the king was, and etc. So it's a beautiful story about how that the atheistic, quote-unquote, side of Buddhism is not the ultimate side. And that the ultimate side of Buddhism is the great vehicle, or the Mahayana, which puts the emphasis on the endless path of compassionate service to the Buddhas, to the forms of God, in other words, and to working to help awaken others and bring others into enlightenment. This is said to be more transcendental, higher, and actually the only path. So let me just begin then. Chapter 4 of the Lotus Sutra, Belief and Understanding. If you want to read along, you can just Google Lotus Sutra and you should be able to find it. At that time, the wise and long-lived Shubhuti, Mahakatyayana, Mahakashyap, and Mahamagdayana, having heard from the Buddha Dharma such as they had never heard before, the bestowal of the prediction of Anuruddha Sammaka Sambodhi upon Shariputra, felt it very rare. They rose from their seats, jumped for joy, straightened their robes, bared their right shoulders, placed their right knees on the ground, and single-mindedly put their palms together, inclined themselves respectfully, and gazed at the honored countenance, and spoke to the Buddha, saying, "We who dwell at the head of the Sangha and are advanced in years told ourselves that we are beyond comprehension. Buddha, in essence of immeasurable," this is a quote from him, "Buddha, in essence of immeasurable, incomprehensible, unfathomable, excellent, exalted body, wisdom, qualities, and activities, extremely wondrous and fantastic, is vast like space and the holy source, giving rise to all that is wished by sentient beings like a wish-granting jewel, a wish-granting tree." Okay, so this chapter 4 of the Lotus Sutra is a beautiful parable. It looks almost like it was taken from, I made the remark yesterday that it looks almost like it was taken from the New Testament, just because of the type of story and the parable that it is. But it describes how that emptiness, non-attachment, and all these kind of things which are associated most prominently with Buddhism were lesser dharmas that the Buddha had to engage us in, because he understood, well, those people who followed those lesser quote-unquote truths initially, I myself being one of them, that God or Buddha had to show lesser dharmas in order to attract people, because they couldn't out and out accept the highest realization of their nature and of Buddha, of God. And the metaphor that they use is like a king who has all of these jewels and gold and all these kind of things, and he's trying to gradually bequeath these things to his son, but the son.
Shakti Seer 2.
I'm recording. Today I'm going to read from chapter 4 of the Lotus Sutra, chapter 4 of the Lotus Sutra initially got my attention because I was looking at the Lotus Sutra Wikipedia page, and in the middle of the Lotus Sutra's Wikipedia page it says that the Lotus Sutra indicates in chapter 4 that emptiness, sunyata, is not the ultimate vision to be attained by the aspirant bodhisattvas. The attainment of Buddha wisdom is indicated to be a bliss-bestowing treasure that transcends seeing all as merely empty or merely labeled. And it says on the page of Buddhahood that on Mahayana Buddhism, the Tibetan master Dolpopa said that the Buddha is to be understood as the wondrous and holy wish-fulfilling essence of all things, beyond